All right, good evening, everyone. We will start, as we always do, with our prayer for NCH Council. God, our Father, we are all your servants. We trust in your mercy and love. We trust also in your guidance. Direct the meetings of this council of North College Hill to make good decisions for all the people who live in our city. Give all the members of this council wisdom and insight to know what is best for our city. Help us to be fair and just in all our decisions. Bless us all to do the very best we can with your help and guidance. We pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, we'll call this meeting to order. January 4th, North College Hill City Council meeting. I will share my screen so that we can do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, good evening, everyone. Roll call, please, Ms. Dewald.
Miss Bailey. Miss Blythe.
Here.
Miss Underwood.
Here.
Mr. Miller-Novak.
Here.
Miss Zorb.
Here.
Miss Hartman.
Here.
Miss Anderson.
Here.
I have all present except for Miss Bailey.
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood.
I move that we excuse Miss Bailey from tonight's meeting.
Mr. President, I'll second that motion.
Motion from Ms. Underwood, second by Ms. Anderson to excuse Ms. Bailey from tonight's meeting. Any discussion?
Mr. President,
Ms. Zorb?
I know you asked prior to the meeting, but I'll ask again. Has anyone heard from her? So we don't know if she has an excuse? All right, thanks.
All right, please call the roll, Ms. Dewald.
Miss Blythe.
Yes.
Miss Underwood.
Yes.
Mr. Miller-Novak.
Yes.
Miss Zorb.
No,
Miss Hartman.
Yes.
And Miss Anderson.
Yes.
Motion to excuse passes 5-1.
All right, thank you. Next, we do have tonight's agenda. Two things that I noticed. First off is the council meeting minutes. It says that we are to review, has the wrong date.
Oh.
We are reviewing the 12/21. And then my understanding from Ms. Hall to remove resolution 03/2021 from the agenda.
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood.
I move that we amend the agenda to change the date next to council meeting minutes to December 21st, 2020. And also remove first reading of resolution 3-2021.
Mr. President, I'll second that motion.
All right, so we have a motion from Ms. Underwood to amend tonight's agenda, changing the date of the meeting minutes that we are going to review to 12/21, as well as remove the first reading of resolution 03-2021. The second is by Ms. Anderson. Discussion? Ms. Dewald, please call the roll.
Ms. Blythe,
Yes.
Ms. Underwood,
Yes.
Mr. Miller-Novak,
Yes.
Ms. Zorb,
Yes.
Ms. Hartman,
Yes.
and Ms.
Yes.
Anderson.
Sorry.
And Ms.
Yeah.
Anderson.
Yeah.
Motion to amend passes 6-0.
Thank you, Ms. Dewald. All right, so we do have the meeting minutes from the 12/21 meeting.
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood,
I move that we accept the December 21st meeting minutes.
can I back up? I apologize. We need to adopt the agenda. Sorry, I skipped that.
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood,
I move that we adopt tonight's agenda.
Mr. President, I'll second that motion.
thank you. Motion for Ms. Underwood, second by Ms. Anderson to adopt tonight's agenda. Any
As
discussion?
amended. As amended.
I'm sorry, as amended, yes, thank you. All right, Ms. Dewald, please call the roll.
Ms. Blythe,
Yes.
Ms. Underwood,
Yes.
Mr. Miller-Novak,
Yes.
Ms. Zorb,
Yes.
Ms. Hartman,
Yes.
and Ms. Anderson.
Yes.
Motion to adopt passes 6-0.
Thank you. Now we have the meeting minutes from 12/21.
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood,
I move that we adopt the meeting minutes from 12/21/2020.
Mr. President, I'll second that motion.
motion for Ms. Underwood, second by Ms. Anderson to accept the meeting minutes from the 12/21 meeting. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Ms. Blythe,
Yes.
Ms. Underwood,
Yes.
Mr. Miller-Novak,
Yep.
Ms. Zorb,
Yes.
Ms. Hartman,
Yes.
and Ms. Anderson.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you, Ms. Dewald. When you are ready, communications.
Communications, this time we have the Walter Drain invoice, which actually I was supposed to put on last month in December, but I forgot. So the Cities and Village magazine, it's the November, December edition of 2020. And then the December Mayor's Court report. And I sent that by email just this evening, right before the meeting started.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mhm.
Any questions for the clerk? All right, we'll move on to council committees, budget and finance.
Mr. President,
Ms. Zorb,
I'm not the chair, but I'll give a quick report that we have not met since the last council meeting. And I have not heard from Ms. Bailey, but I do recall, and it's in the minutes, that our next meeting is scheduled for January 11th, but she said that was tentative. So I'm not sure what she meant by that, but throw that out there and reiterate it.
So it's still tentative.
Like I said, I haven't heard
Yes, ma'am.
any confirmation either way.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. President,
Ms. Dewald.
I believe when Miss Bailey said that January 11th was a tentative date, I believe that's her son's birthday. Does that ring a bell with anyone?
I do not know.
So I see a couple nods. Okay, so I think that's what that meant. Other than that, I don't know why it's tentative.
Okay, thank you for the update, Ms. Zorb. City and Community Development and Recreation.
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood.
I am a member of that committee. Ms. Bailey is also the chair of that committee as well, and we have not met since our last council meeting.
Next meeting date tentative January 11th.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Underwood. Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our last meeting was held on December 28th of 2020. We talked about some goals that we had for 2021. We talked about the fire levy, and Ms. Zorb indicated that she would like to see the document regarding the results of the fire task force. I believe that that was forwarded to everyone. Ms. Zorb, did you receive a copy of that? I did give an overview of what occurred with the fire task force and how I was a member of the fire task force and how we actually came to the agreement for the resolution. Mr. Miller-Novak mentioned that the new valuations may have increased the home values or increased the home values of many residents. And he wondered how that may impact the findings of the fire task force. There was some discussion about the home values and how that would impact other issues within the city. I am going to follow up on several issues, including the home values impact on the fire task force. I'm going to follow up about removable speed humps and a resolution about using CARES Act funds to purchase computers. There was legislation that was presented at our meeting, safe routes to school. I believe that legislation is on tonight's agenda. So there was some significant discussion / debate about this piece of legislation. Mr. Miller-Novak actually was able to give us some background information about the origins of this resolution. And we decided that we would refer it to the full council agenda for discussion / debate. And if we had further questions, that I agreed that I would move that it be referred back to the committee. Old business, we talked about the speed hump program. That's when I kind of advised everyone that there were removable speed humps. Everyone thought that was a good idea because, then that way we could move those from place to place. They're significantly less expensive than the permanent ones. And we can remove them in the winter months and put them back out in the summer and spring months. We also talked about purchase of surface computers with CARES Act funding. Not everyone really was interested in that, but I did agree to send Mr. Deters information about writing legislation to address that issue. Ms. Zorb actually did have sample legislation, so I did forward that on to Mr. Deters. Our meeting adjourned at 8:32 p.m.
Thank you, Ms. Underwood. Up next, Rules and Public Policy.
Thank you, Mr. President. We met at 6:30 on Monday, December 28th. We talked about, some of the goals that we might have for 2021. One of those things was to come up with some rules or guidelines for committees. And there was some significant discussion about what that might include, such as, Mr. Miller-Novak voiced some concerns about if we put too many rules for committees that it might discourage people from participating in the meetings. Also, there was some discussion about emergency situations, about, how much leeway we really have when there's an emergency that happens. Ms. Bailey suggested that maybe the meetings on ICRC, if they could be considered meeting minutes, and Mr. Miller-Novak advised us that they are not. Ms. Underwood suggested that, or I suggested that we hire someone to organize our documents for us, and Ms. Zorb suggested that we ask if the city secretary could help us with that in her spare time. So we'll figure that out. We'll follow up on that. Mr. Miller-Novak gave us some guidance with regard to what is required for keeping meeting minutes, why it's a great idea to have written meeting minutes. And Ms. Zorb suggested that the vice chair can be responsible for taking the minutes of the committees. But what it boils down to is that the entire council probably needs to do a committee of the whole to discuss like rules and guidelines for the committees and committee chairs. What should be like basic requirements if you're going to be the chair of a committee. We also talked about potentially modifying council rules. And we also talked about working with the law director. My notes are not really clear, but there was some discussion about possibly setting guidelines within this committee for the law director. Mr. Miller-Novak suggested that the law director might report to this committee. And Ms. Bailey just started a discussion about the law director. We kind of there was a significant discussion there about the law director again, and but there was really just kind of no resolution. That was just kind of a suggestion about how we might move forward with a full-time law director, and how we might kind of stay in contact with him and what he's up to and what he's doing. Some action items that we have would be to schedule a committee of the whole meeting. Ms. Bailey suggested that we could have this discussion during our yearly organizational meeting. Either add it to the agenda of the first council meeting. Also, she asked about the Charter Review Commission, and it's my understanding that we needed to have the people in place at the time the committee was formed. So the commission that we formed was not valid. There was no legislation. Under old business, we briefly discussed the mayor's veto of the line item veto of the salary ordinance that we had passed. We just decided that it was moot. And if when the new salary ordinance passes, if we need to, we can discuss it at that point in time. We talked about storage for agendas, minutes, and other documents briefly, and we adjourned at 7:33 p.m.
Thank you, Ms. Underwood. Any ad hoc committee reports?
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood.
the CIC has not met since our last council meeting.
Thank you. Any other?
Ms. Underwood, do you know when that next CIC meeting is scheduled?
I do not. I think I want to say it's either the second or third Thursday of every month, but don't quote me on that. I usually wait until I get the email from the president, and when I get that this time, I can forward it to you as well.
Mr. President,
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Ms. Nichols.
it is the third Thursday of every month at 6:30.
Okay, any other ad hoc committee reports? All right, I hear none. We'll move on to the administrative reports. Madam Mayor, Ms. Nichols.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, everyone. I would first like to wish everyone a happy new year. And with that being said, hopefully with this year, things can get back to a little bit of normalcy, just based off of last year. Last year was a tough year for us considering with COVID, and we were not able to do a lot of the things that we intended on doing or that we wanted to do as a city, even as an administration. So hopefully some things can turn around. Did hear that the governor is anticipating on March 1st for all the schools to start back. So I don't know what that looks like for the different municipalities, but I'm a little hopeful. The other thing I wanted to just briefly discuss is I heard Ms. Underwood, she talked a little bit about the mayor's task force. And just so you know, we are planning to do another meeting with the task force. They have not disbanded. They are still working. We wanted to get through the holidays and up to the new year so we can start getting together some dates and some town halls so we can get the information of their findings out to the citizens. So look forward to those. Look for those dates and the times. They should be coming out soon here within the next week. We plan to meet within the next week or two. And that's all I have, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols. Any questions for the mayor? All right, next up is the city administrator's report. Mr. Mosby.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I would like to say Happy New Year to everyone, and I'm hopeful that everyone had an enjoyable holiday. I'd like to start off with a little bit of good news. When I arrived at work this morning, I was pleased to see that the meter had been installed on the electric for the electric vehicle charging stations. So that means that they will be up and running here very soon. Actually, I already know that they've been put into the app so that if people who are driving electric vehicles are driving, they will be able to see North College Hill and those charging stations on their app if they're looking for a place to charge. But I will be working with Kevin Cushman, who is the president and CEO of Electrata, so that we can actually do a grand opening, if you will, of the charging station. So we'll be working on that this weekend, and I can give you information on that. I appreciated something that Ms. Underwood said, and I did want to take a moment to expound on it. I do not want to make my report overly long, but I do feel that it is important. She had mentioned that there was a statement about real estate valuations. She is correct. There was a comment that was made, and I wanted to bring some clarity to it. I believe it was Ms. Zorb had indicated that there was some wrong information that was given, and that is not correct. I did make a presentation where I had mentioned that the valuations or the revenues that we would receive from the that were projected, and at the time that I made the presentation, the reevaluations of our real properties had not yet been completed. And so at that time, what I had said was that based on the fact that they were looking at basically no increase at that time, that's all they could do. And they usually also take into account that 100% of revenues will not be collected. I had said that we might be looking at a 4 or 5% decrease. However, since the last meeting, we did receive the valuation based on the request that we had sent out for the road levy. And when that came back, it did show that our property valuation is approximately $125 million, which is about $15 million more than the previous valuation. So yes, there is an increase in the real properties. And so when we do seek or request evaluation for a fire levy, it's likely that that will be the number that will be used. But again, we could only go on what the Hamilton County Auditor had given us at the time. But as you have already seen, and as you will be discussing tonight, there is the valuation that we just received from the Hamilton County Auditor that shows the most recent amount. Mr. President, that is about all that I have for right now.
Thank you, Mr. Mosby. Are there any questions for the city administrator? All right, next up, Law Director report. Mr. Deters.
Mr. President, I do not have any report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deters. Any questions for the Law Director? All right, next is the Finance Director report. Ms. Hall.
Good evening. I do not have a report at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Any questions for the Finance Director? All right, that will take us to call of members. Ms. Blythe.
No comment at this time.
Thank you, ma'am. Next up is Ms. Underwood.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just like to take this opportunity to wish everybody a happy new year. And I have high hopes and that we will have a very productive year as a city council. And I don't mean that to be an attack on anyone. I promise. I just want us to be, productive and do good work this year. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Underwood. Next up, Mr. Miller-Novak.
Yeah, so my New Year's resolution was to give longer call of member speeches this year. So strap on a safety belt. So I want to echo what Arica said. I've kind of been doing stock a little bit and thinking and talking to her as well as Ron a little bit, and just airing some frustrations on our shortcomings in the past to do much but debate the same several things. We spend 95% of our time talking about the budget and arguing sometimes over really minimal amounts of money, and we spend a lot of time talking about pay ordinances and things like that. I'm not saying they're not important, but I think the problem is when we spend so much time discussing council rules and procedure and things like that, I don't think that's what our residents want us to be doing. I think our constituents want us to be brainstorming and coming up with policy decisions to bring new business into the city, to increase the home values in our city, and being very critical of us as a unit, and not pointing any fingers by any stretch of the imagination. I can't point to any time where I've done that when I've been on council, where we've had very substantive conversations, where we set goals, where we talked about how we're going to increase home values, how we're going to bring new businesses in. We don't do it. And unfortunately, in my time in council, it sometimes feel like Groundhog's Day. We have the same 4 arguments where we discuss the same 4 grievances over and over and over. Day in, it repeats, except unlike Groundhog Day, we don't get Annie McDowell in the end. It just keeps repeating. And I think it's time for us to get off the hamster wheel and find ways to devote our time to setting goals, to setting policy, to do the things that people want us to do for them. Because I guarantee if you go out and you ask the public and you say, hey, what would you rather spend our time on? Arguing about whether things belong in committee or on the council floor, or how the committee should operate, or when the administration should get us legislation, or how we should get the legislation? Or would you rather we spend our time deliberating how to make your home worth more money? Would you rather us spend our time deliberating about how to get new businesses in North College Hill? I'm not a pollster, but I guarantee you, anybody in the community you ask that question to would say, I want my home to be worth more money. I want new business here. They don't care. I don't think they care about whether things go into committee first or on council floor and stuff like that. We need to stop spending so much time arguing about it, in my opinion. If there's a question whether or not something should go to committee, we should just call the vote on it. If we vote that it goes in committee, we move on. We need to start working towards setting goals and achieving goals and improving the lives of our residents and focusing as much as humanly possible of our time doing that rather than none of it. I am working on a couple things as to not be a hypocrite. I am working on a couple things. I have been talking with Arica. We're throwing together some stuff. I've been talking to Ron. I hope to present that. I hope you guys have open minds. I hope we start thinking about the year 2021 as a chance to start thinking of new strategies moving forward and start spending our time doing much more exciting things, much more productive things that our residents will be more excited about, and stop grinding on the same grievances and find a way to find a new day and to set new resolutions for our city in the beginning of this year. That's all I have today.
Thank you, Mr. Miller-Novak. Ms. Zorb.
So my New Year's resolution is to talk less and call the members. But I'd like to say also that I do think that rules are there for a reason. So there's that. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you, Ms. Zorb. Ms. Hartman.
Hello. Hello. Mr. Miller-Novak, amen, and Happy New Year. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Hartman. Ms. Anderson.
Hi, guys. So first I wanted to point out that North College Hill has once again met the requirements of being a We Thrive city in 2020. And so I thought that that was pretty cool. And I think that all the people who put work into making our city more healthy and happy and our residents more healthy and happy deserve some recognition. So kudos to those people. And on the subject of being healthy, for anybody out there watching this, please wear your mask. In my trips around North College Hill these last couple weeks, I've seen a lot of people without masks around our city and a lot of people who work for our city without masks around, which is very discouraging. So like Mary Jo said, there are rules for a reason, and there's rules for the mask, and there's a reason for those rules. So please wear those. But also I would like to say kudos to Mr. Miller-Novak for sharing his opinion, because I think that what he said is very valuable, and I think that we can really take that into consideration and take it to heart. But thank you. Happy New Year, guys.
And thank you, Ms. Anderson. All right, next on the agenda is legislation. Ms. Dewald. You're on mute, Ms. Dewald.
So sorry. Thank you.
Don't feel bad about it. I've done it twice already tonight. So
I take it off so I can cough. We have a first reading on Resolution 1, 2021, authorizing the city administrator to enter into an agreement and execute a contract with the Ohio Department of Transportation for various pedestrian improvements in North College Hill and declaring that an emergency.
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood.
I would like to ask if Mr. Mosby would give us some background on Resolution 1-2021, please, like what it is and how much it's going to cost the city.
Mr. Mosby.
Thank you, Mr. President. Resolution 1, 2021 is a resolution that will allow me to enter into an agreement primarily with ODOT. This legislation originated as a part of the Safe Routes to School program, which is a partnership between us and the North College Hill City Schools. Now I say it's a partnership because while the improvements are for the benefit of the students, the pedestrians, of course, we, being the city, are the governing body, and so therefore we are the local agent that would be responsible for making the repairs or the improvements because they are in our public right of way. A little while ago, last year, there was a resolution that was passed endorsing the Safe Routes to School plan. It was done by this council as well as the school board. Since that time, ODOT has been working with us and they've been going through to refine the plan. I have talked to my contact at ODOT. The cost of the improvements is approximately $184,000, and that funding is provided through a safety grant from the state of Ohio. Therefore, there is no cost to the city. This is one of the reasons that the legislation is worded the way it is. Another important point that should be known is that the wording in the language, in the resolution is standard ODOT language, which they have for basically all of their resolutions or agreements that they have with cities when they are doing these types of improvements or this type of work. And so basically, again, the reason that there isn't any dollar value attached to this is because nothing is coming out of our pocket, number one. Number two, it's simply an authorization to allow me to enter into the agreement with ODOT so that we can get the work done. This is the result of, again, work that many people who have been on the Safe Routes to School program have been doing for a long time. And so I would recommend to council that council passes this legislation so that we can stay on track. They would like to have this project let. In other words, they want to be able to get it started in April. And in order for us to do that, I need to be able to get this to them by February.
Thank you, Mr. Mosby.
Mr. President. I have a
Ms.
question. Mr. Mosby, I guess I'm just a little bit confused then, because you're saying that it cost the city $0, but in section 3, the third paragraph says the LPA further agrees to pay 100% of the cost. So that's confusing to me. Can you help me understand why it says we're going to pay 100% of the cost, but you're saying we pay $0?
Because that's standard language that is in their particular agreements that they have. It is the money that is provided for this particular project is grant money that is coming from the state. They will administer the project and pay all the bills.
So where does it say anything about the grant? Because I've read this 2 or 3 times and I see no verbiage whatsoever about grant money.
Ms. Orb, again, this is a resolution to allow me to enter into the agreement. This isn't a contract for any kind of money or anything like that. It's strictly it's council's authorization for me to enter into the agreements with ODOT.
Mr.
Ron, I
President.
hear what you're saying, but it doesn't agree with what I'm reading. And that's, and now Matt's gonna be pissed because I'm asking questions. I don't understand it, so help me understand the difference in the terminology between the two.
I'm actually not sure what more I can say. This is an agreement that is standard language.
So how do we
The
get
Ohio
something written
Department
in
of
here
Hold
that's
on,
not
Ms. Dorr, please.
standard, that says something about
So
the
this is
grant?
standard language that comes from contracts from the Ohio Department of Transportation. These contracts that are let, and especially the ones like this, are monies that are granted from the state safety program, and they administer and pay, of course, all of the costs that are associated with the subject improvements. So I'm not sure what more that I can tell you that would somehow enlighten you anymore. I apologize, but ODOT is paying for these improvements.
If
Mr.
I may, I
President.
would like to point out that in that section there, you're talking about that paragraph, Ms. Zorb. It talks about paying 100% of the features that would be requested by the LPA that have been determined to be unnecessary for the project. So I mean, I think as you go into that contract, if you start asking for things that aren't part of what people have already worked on, that was my understanding of that.
Mr. President.
Mr. Miller-Novak.
Mr. Mosby, is there currently a contract that's written that we're giving you authority to enter into, or we're just giving you authority to enter into a contract? Is that your
No, there is
understanding?
no contract. There is no contract yet because there is no authority to enter into one.
Okay, well, sometimes, there's a contract and we can review the contract and give you authority to enter into it, but you're saying we're just basically giving you authority to enter into a contract.
That is correct. That's why I've already talked with ODOT, and that's why I gave you the estimate of how much the improvements would be. And even though we're not paying for them, the estimate of the total improvements is about $184,000, which is another reason that it wasn't included in the budget, for example, for 2021.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to point out that 2 more paragraphs later, there's another stipulation that says the LPA, which is us, the city, further agrees to pay 100% of the cost to install and or repair curb ramps at all necessary intersections to ensure compliance with the American Disability Act. So that doesn't talk about anything that's unnecessary. Safe routes to school was probably handicap accessible ramps.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. Ms. Dewald, next.
We have a first reading on resolution 2. Now, again, I just shuffled. A resolution determining to proceed to levy a renewal of additional tax in excess of the 10 mil limitation.
Mr. President.
Mr. Mosby.
This is the subsequent or follow-up legislation from the request that was originally approved by council for the valuation. Of course, that's attached to this particular piece of legislation. This is what is required, necessary for us to submit to the Hamilton County Board of Elections. I will remind council that has to be done prior to February the 4th, I believe, in order for it to make it onto the May 2021 ballot for election or for consideration by the electors.
Thank you, Mr. Mosby. proceed, Ms. Dewald.
Then we have a second reading on ordinance 17, 2020. An ordinance to establish salaries and staffing levels for city employees pursuant to the requirements of section 3.06 of the City of North College Hill Charter.
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood.
I move that we suspend the readings, the second and third reading on resolution 1-2021 and adopt resolution 1-2021. Do I have to do two different motions?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
And
all right. Okay, so
Uh,
then I just moved that we suspend the second and third reading on resolution 1-2021.
so if I can clarify, you want to suspend the third reading?
No.
No,
There
I'm sorry.
hasn't,
Which one? All right, hang on. Start over.
I would like to
sorry.
suspend the second and third reading on resolution 1-2021.
Resolution 1-2021, which is the resolution authorizing the city administrator enter into an agreement and execute a contract with the Ohio Department of Transportation for various pedestrian improvements in North College Hill and declaring an emergency.
That is correct.
Mr. President, I'll second the motion.
All right, so the motion on the floor from Ms. Underwood is to suspend second and third readings for resolution 1-2021. The second is by Ms. Anderson. Discussion. Please call the roll, Ms. Dewald.
Ms. Blythe,
No.
Ms. Underwood,
Yes.
Mr. Miller-Novak,
Yes.
Ms. Zorb,
No.
Ms. Hartman,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson.
Yes.
So we have a vote of 4-3, and that's to suspend. So that
4 to
motion,
4-2 to suspend second. and third
4-2, I'm
reading.
sorry, that motion fails. Isn't that correct?
I believe it does.
That's correct. It failed.
All right, that is all we have for legislation tonight.
Actually, Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood.
I move to suspend the second and third reading on resolution 2-2021.
Mr. President, I'll second that motion.
All right, so the motion by Ms. Underwood, second by Ms. Anderson to suspend second and third readings on resolution 2-2021, which is a resolution determining to proceed to levy a renewal of additional tax in excess of the 10 mil limitation. Discussion. Ms. Dewald, please call the roll.
Ms. Blythe,
No.
Ms. Underwood,
Yes.
Mr. Miller-Novak,
Yep.
Ms. Zorb,
Yes.
Ms. Hartman,
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
We have a vote of 5-1. So with one absent, how does this work for suspension?
Fails. We need 6, so it fails.
So no matter how many members we have, we still need 6.
That's correct, ma'am.
For
Thank
suspension
you.
of readings, yes.
All righty, so that fails 5-1. And then we had our second reading on ordinance 17. Are we doing anything with that?
All right, we'll move on to
Mr. President,
Ms. Orb.
can we have a discussion on ordinance 17, 2020?
Sure.
I believe Mr. Miller-Novak was going to work on some type of strikeouts or some additional comments to the documents that we have for that. Did that get accomplished? Do we have copies of that? I have not seen it in my email. I'd kind of like to see that before the third reading, if possible.
Mr. Miller-Novak.
Hang on one second. I gotta bring up my email. Okay, sorry. Actually, I spoke with Mr. Deters today, and he's going to provide something to us. If you're referring to the law director's information, we talked for about, geez, I don't know, Bill, was it about an hour today?
Yeah, it was probably about an hour.
So we're on the same page. He's going to make the corrections. I'm sorry I didn't get in time for the second reading, but it'll be done in time for the third reading. So, Mr. Deters, do you mind getting that to me maybe tomorrow or something? You said,
Yeah, I
you
planned
said
on. Yeah, I plan on getting it to you first thing in the morning.
Okay. Yep. Thanks. So my apologies, but you'll have something to everybody in time for the third reading. I'm focusing on the $54,000 package. He'll just kind of clarify what that's going to include in more details in terms of his attendance at regular council meetings is what we discussed, and list off all the duties that covers. And the only exceptions to that would be litigation, whether in the traditional form of a court or arbitration, which practically speaking, and I'm sure he'll kind of rehash what I'm about to say, we're probably going to have to pay him for arbitrations because those happen within the labor system. Most of the things that would happen externally in the court system is going to be covered by our insurance pool and assigned counsel, and he'll just be paid as a kind of a go-between in those scenarios. Correct, Bill?
Yeah, that's correct. I'd say that if there is any litigation, it would most likely be in an arbitration standpoint, unless there was something very unusual where we were sued by a third party and they did not ask for any kind of damages. Maybe some injunctive relief or something might on occasion not be covered, but it'd be unlikely. Most likely the insurance would cover any of those kind of things.
All right, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, that'll move us to the next item on the agenda, comments from the audience. I see no attendees present, so we'll move to old business. I hear no old business. We'll move on to new business.
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood.
We received the 2021 list of committees and members from Ms. Dewald in our email. And I would just like to say, I believe, I reviewed it, and I believe that Ms. Zorb is a member of the Public Safety Committee. She's not listed, but I believe she is a member. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Zorb.
You're correct.
And you said that was the public safety, Ms. Underwood?
Yes.
Ms. Dewald, did you get that?
I did. I will make that correction.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood.
our council rules require us to have an organizational meeting within the first 10 days or something. If that just means talking about the committees and the calendar, I'm just hoping that we can just do that right now, really quickly, and get it over with rather than having an extra meeting.
Mr. President,
Ms. Dewald.
will you allow me to check on that for a minute? Because I think I sent that to Ms. Underwood. And we only need that organizational meeting on or before January 10th, following each general election of council. So did we have, I don't even know what happened in November.
We did not have a general election for any council seats.
Okay, so that organizational meeting really isn't required then by January 10th. I guess we could probably have it at our leisure.
As part of that, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to accept the calendar as presented by Ms. Dewald. Council meeting calendar that includes committee meetings.
All right, so let me catch up here. Motion to accept the council meeting calendar, which was presented by the clerk of council.
Mr. President.
2021 year. Ms.
Mr. President.
Underwood.
I'll second that motion.
Motion by Ms. Zorb, second by Ms. Underwood. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Ms. Blythe,
Yes.
Ms. Underwood,
Yes.
Mr. Miller-Novak,
Yes.
Ms. Zorb,
Yes.
Ms. Hartman,
Yes.
and I almost said Mr. O'Shea, Ms. Anderson.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you, Ms.
Mr.
Dewald. Thank you, Ms. Zorb.
Mr. President.
Ms. Underwood.
There's still no chair for the City and Community Development and Recreation Committee. Just wondering if anybody is interested.
Mr. President,
Ms. Anderson.
I'm still not.
Well,
One second. I'm still not totally sorry. My dog was barking upstairs. So I had to go check on her. But I'm still not totally sure what like the job of the co-chair is, and I know that Ms. Underwood was talking earlier about making set standards for the chair and the co-chair of committees, but if it is to take minutes and to participate, then I would be willing to step in as co-chair of Community and Recreation Committee.
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood.
at the risk of making Ms. Anderson run in the other direction screaming, the vacancy for that committee is actually for the chair.
I think that I may be misspeaking, but I think that Miss Bailey was saying that like whoever wants to step into whatever position, she'll take the other position. So maybe we should just wait until next meeting when she's here, and then we can kind of like go from there. But just so that it's kind of on record, I would be for co-chair, not for chair.
I understand that. And I apologize.
So back to the question on the organizational meeting. So for clarification, do we have to have an organizational meeting? We just don't have to have it by the 10th, or we don't have to have one at all because we did not have an election year?
Mr. President,
Mr. Miller-Novak.
I kind of understand things the way Ms. DeWald just stated them, because a lot of the point of the organizational meeting is to assign seating after general election when seats change hands, right? And the order that we sit in council chambers, which right now really seems pointless. I guess I claimed my couch dibs. But I think the other thing is too is when council changes hands to reassign people into different committees and things like that. I mean, with the things that you do in an organizational meeting besides the calendar, which we just did, without a general election and an overchange in power and things like that, there's really very little point to have an organizational meeting.
Mr. President.
Ms. Anderson.
Yeah, sorry, I could be wrong, but the way that Ms. DeWald read it, it kind of sounded like you only have to have an organizational meeting before, like, at all, if there's a new election, and it just has to be before the 10th. But I'm not the law director, so I could be wrong on the wording, but that's what it sounded like to me. So to like answer your question from my point of view, it sounds like we don't have to have one.
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood.
I would just like to suggest just a different interpretation, just you know, to keep things interesting, I suppose. So even though it does kind of discuss, you know, after the election of council members, it doesn't really take into account when council members resign and new council members are appointed in their place, whether or not, you know, because I know that there are, and even though we haven't met in person, there is some benefit to sitting strategically in a certain seat in council chambers. So I would just like to suggest that maybe that's something that would be addressed at an organizational meetings, regardless of whether there is an election or not. Also, I would also like to suggest that we really do need to set some guidelines for our committees. And maybe that's something we could discuss as well.
Mr. President.
Ms. Anderson.
I'm new, so I'm not sure how long it normally takes to decide the chair placement, but is that something that we could just do to like tonight? Just decide who wants what chair?
Mr. President.
Ms. Underwood.
I would agree with you, Ms. Anderson. However, Ms. Bailey is absent, and I believe that the discussion last time, she was the primary one involved in that discussion of chair placement. So,
Mr. President, may I please?
Go ahead, Ms. DeWald.
Speaking from experience, that chair replacement only happens after a general election. And the way it looks now, like Mr. Novak said, we are going to be on our office chairs and our own couches for a while. That organizational meeting is only meant to be done, like he said, basically for chair placement, and then who's going to be on what committee, because if you have a lot of new people, that takes up a lot of time. In this case, we basically, I mean, Ms. Anderson has kindly stepped up to be co-chair, so that's filled one of the positions. Ms. Bailey will take the other. Our seating arrangements really shouldn't change until next January because we'll have an election in the fall. Does that make sense?
Well, it does. I'm sorry, Mr. President.
Mr. Miller-Novak.
I think it does, but I mean, we could very easily, someone could call a motion and we could vote whether or not we want to reestablish our seating charts or any, or reestablish committee chairs or whatever we want to do. I mean, we have the power to motion, to vote, to do whatever we want to do. So if someone wants to motion, why don't we just motion and vote on it and move on? If no one wants to change chairs,
So
the
then
motion
again,
won't pass.
I'll just put the rules away then and just throw them out.
Well, actually, Mr. Wall, if you look at the rules, we can always deviate from the rules by motion.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's just someone
Just
wants
trying
to,
to save you guys another meeting.
hey,
Do I
man,
have to be involved with that meeting?
not necessarily. If it's
Okay.
a committee of the whole, Mr. Graver can take meeting minutes. He's the president. But I'm not saying I want to do it. I'm just saying I want to be done talking about it. So let's just motion and do it or not.
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood.
I don't care what chair I sit in, honestly. I care not. So I have no intentions of making a motion. So if we're gonna be done with that, then we can be done with it. I was just trying to suggest a different interpretation, possibly. That's all.
Thank you. Any other new business?
Mr. President,
Ms. Zorb?
I hear no one speaking up about additional new business, so I would like to make a motion to adjourn.
Mr.
Mr.
President, I'll
President.
second the motion.
Ms. Anderson beat you, Mr. Dewald. Or Mr.
Mr.
Miller,
Dewald.
Wow,
That's a new
Oh,
one.
man.
that went
Yeah.
downhill fast.
Hope Jim doesn't find out.
Let me just exit out of this very quickly. Motion by Ms. Zorb, second by Ms. Anderson. Adjourn. Discussion. Please call the roll.
Ms. Blythe,
Yes.
Ms. Underwood,
Yes.
Mr. Miller-Novak,
Yes.
Ms. Zorb,
Yes.
Ms. Hartman,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson.
Yes.
Motion to adjourn passes 6-0.
All right. Thank you, everyone. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, folks.
Good night.
Thank-
Good evening.
Yeah.